I want to thank my colleague, Senator Lee, and our staff and his staff, who work very well together, as well as Senator Grassley is with us, who's been such a leader when it comes to these competition issues way before it was cool. So thank you for being here, Senator Grassley. So this is the latest in the Competition Policy Subcommittee series of hearings examining America's monopoly problem. Today we're going to focus on the lack of competition in our prescription drug markets. The stakes could not be higher. According to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, healthcare spending accounted for 17.7% of U.S. gross domestic product in 2019. That is more than 1/6 of the American economy. That is projected to rise to 19.7% by 2028. And rising prescription drug prices is a key driver in those numbers. But it isn't just about GDP, it's also about the all too real human costs that we will hear about today. For some, the ability to access prescription drugs is what enables them to work, to care for their families and loved ones, preserve their mental health, or just get through the day without excruciating pain. For others, access to safe and affordable prescription drugs is nothing less than matter of life or death. But nearly 20%, just remember this figure if you forget all of the other ones, nearly 20% of older adults report not taking their medicines as prescribed because of costs. That means, and I have met some of these seniors at home, they're cutting pills in half. They are saving little drops of insulin for the next day. Even drugs that have been available for decades, like insulin, are out of reach for some. In my state, one of my most memorable families that I've gotten to know is the mom and dad of Alec. He was a restaurant manager, had a pretty good job in the suburbs of the Twin Cities, and when he aged off his parents' health care at age 26, he had to start paying for his own insulin. He was trying to cut the doses and do it himself, and he didn't do it right one day, and he died. And his mother has made it her life's work to make sure that never happens to anyone again. Americans should not have to choose between risking their lives and risking financial ruin because of the cost of prescription drugs. I actually got involved in the area of antitrust, not just because I drew the good luck of working with Mike Lee on the subcommittee, but when I was actually a brand new senator and pharmacists from my state and doctors started calling me about an infant heart drug called indomethacin. And the price of the drug, the cost of the drug, had suddenly gone up from $78 per treatment to $1,600, more than 20 times its original price and 44 times the price in Canada. What had happened was one company called Ovation, they later sold it to another company, they had cornered the market. They bought the other competitive drug. There is absolutely no doubt there were two drugs that were able to be used for this condition. And then, once they had done that and reached the monopoly jackpot, they basically raised the prices that much. It took years and years, sued by the FTC that failed because of conservative precedent that was out there when it comes to antitrust or consumer issues. Other states, red states, blue states, joined in the lawsuits, but that just didn't work. And so what happened was it took years and years for another competitor to come in, but all during that time, they reaped the benefit of a monopoly. So, ideas for solutions. We have the work that Senator Grassley and I have done on pay for delay. One court case helped with that, but there's a lot more work that can be done. And I believe that if we put that bill up for a vote on the Senate floor in any which way, we would get that done. And as you know, that's when brand names pay off generics to keep their products off the market. We've got problems of product hopping, in which branded pharmaceutical companies force patients with an established drug with an expiring patent to a new drug with a new patent, often with little or no therapeutic difference, just to avoid competition from generics. That's a bill that our friends Senator Cornyn and Senator Blumenthal have that could get at that. Sham petitions just before a generic is going to come on the market, the branded files a petition, says it's not safe, slows it down. That's another bill that Senator Grassley and I have to do something about that. Other solutions. Senator Lee and I have worked together on a bill to allow the importation of drugs in certain circumstances when there are issues with pricing. Senator Grassley and I have another bill to do that more permanently of reimportation. We have got the work that we could do on sweeping reform, which is contained in the bill that a number of us has put forward. And then finally, making sure that we are funding the agencies who go after these problems. And we're proud that we got our bill through, Senator Grassley and I did, on that issue. We also can empower our seniors to negotiate drug prices. I think seniors can get a pretty good deal through Medicare if negotiation was allowed, something that the President of the United States directly addressed in the State of the Union. So those are just a few of my ideas. I know there are others, and I want to thank our witnesses for coming today. And with that, I will turn it over to Senator Lee.
Thank you, Chair Klobuchar, and thanks to all of you for being here today. Drug competition in pharmaceutical markets, as well as drug pricing, are frequent and recurring topics of congressional oversight, and with good reason. Access to prescription drugs is an issue that inevitably affects every life at one point or another. Now, if a lack of competition leads to higher prices, as it tends to do, because one thing we know about competition, when it increases, prices tend to go down, quality tends to go up. The opposite happens when there's diminished competition. So if a lack of competition leads to higher prices, we can live without some things. You can live without the latest smartphone or free shipping for gadgets made in China. But a lot of people can't do without prescription drugs. My wife, Sharon, for example, is one of 7 million Americans who can't live without insulin. Innovation, competition, and affordable prices are arguably more important to prescription drug markets than almost any other consumer market we can think of. And it's a consumer market that happens to be particularly important to the sustaining of human life. This makes the continuing rise in drug prices all the more concerning. When we look at the data from 2007 to 2018, the cost of prescription drugs during that period rose 3 times faster than inflation. And that's after we take into account manufacturing discounts. Last month, AARP released findings that drug price increases that outpaced inflation had cost taxpayers $38 billion just between 2015 and 2019 alone. I expect this will only worsen in the wake of the inflationary economic policies that our government has put in place over the last year and a half, and regardless of which administration is in power. When our government expands its role, it tends inevitably to inflate, and that has an effect here. Make no mistake, this is a multifaceted problem, and it's one that requires a multifaceted solution. Antitrust enforcement is not a panacea for drug prices, but it can certainly help. And failure to enforce them can, of course, lead to catastrophic consequences. In fact, our antitrust enforcers have developed an impressive track record thus far in stopping anti-competitive patent litigation settlements and attempts to game the FDA regulatory process to their unfair advantage. Since the 2013 activist decision, pay-for-delay settlements have slowed to barely a trickle. The task is now to remain vigilant until that trickle is no longer even a trickle, but it's gone. The benefit of antitrust enforcement is that it takes matters on a case-by-case basis rather than attempting to impose a one-size-fits-all approach on the entire market. This allows us to stop harmful conduct without needlessly, unnecessarily burdening pro-competitive and innovative conduct, something that usually proves elusive in comprehensive rulemaking and legislation. In situations that are more straightforward, like getting access to brand samples in order to develop a generic alternative, it's easier for Congress to step in and remove the need for lengthy investigations and lengthy litigation. This is what we did with the CREATES Act, a bill that I was honored to co-sponsor along with Senators Grassley, Leahy, and Klobuchar. My understanding is that since it became law back in 2019, at the end of that year, the CREATES Act has already made it much easier for generic competitors to gain access to the samples that they need for FDA-mandated testing. And at the time, the CBO estimated that the CREATES Act would save taxpayers nearly $4 billion over 10 years. Today's hearing may also help shed light on other areas where Congress could step in to reform regulations and policies that create anti-competitive and anti-consumer incentives. I'll be interested to hear the witnesses' thoughts on potential PBM reforms and whether reform to our patent laws might help remove the impetus behind practices like product hopping and patent thickets, saving money for consumers and freeing up antitrust enforcement resources to address other harms. So I look forward to each of our witnesses testifying today and look forward to our conversation. Thank you.
Very good. Okay. Excellent. Well, Senator Grassley is going to come back, so we look forward to that. And his name was mentioned enough that, he doesn't need to do an opening. But we're very pleased he was here. And so now I'm going to introduce our witnesses. And thank you, Senator Lee, for mentioning the CREATE Act, which I failed to do, and you did excellent work on that bill. Our first witness today is Michael Kadish. Mr. Kadish is the Director for Markets and Competition Policy at the Washington Center for Equitable Growth. His research focuses on competition and antitrust enforcement. Prior to joining Equitable Growth, he worked as antitrust counsel for me on this subcommittee as a detailee from the FTC, so he knows this committee well. And before that, he spent nearly 20 years as an attorney at the FTC, including working on a number of healthcare cases. So it's good to have him back. Our second witness is Alden Abbott. Mr. Abbott is currently a senior research fellow at George Mason University, the Mercatus Center, where he focuses on antitrust issues. He is the former general counsel of the Federal Trade Commission. Prior to his tenure as FTC general counsel, he worked at the Heritage Foundation and BlackBerry and held several senior positions in the federal government. Look, there's so many of them. I'm not going to say all of them. But it's very, okay, I will, because it's Deputy Director of the Office of International Affairs, Associate Director of the Bureau of Competition at the FTC, Acting General Counsel, Assistant General Counsel, and Chief Counsel of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, and Special Assistant to the Assistant Attorney General for Antitrust. That's quite a resume. Our third witness is Jeffrey Levitt, and Mr. Levitt is Life Sciences Policy and Regulatory Group. He is testifying today on behalf of the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, a trade group representing many of the country's leading biopharmaceutical companies. He previously served as Senior Vice President and Chief Counsel for Pfizer's Upjohn division in China and as Chief Regulatory Counsel for Pfizer and Wyeth Pharmaceuticals. He also previously served as chair of the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America's Law Section Executive Committee. Next up will be Rachel Moody. Dr. Moody is Vice President and Head of Legal and Intellectual Properties, Biosimilars at Fresenius Kabi, global, did I say that right? Oh, very good. A global healthcare company that specializes in life-saving medicines and technologies for infusion, transfusion, and clinical innovation. Previously, she served as a patent attorney for biosimilars at a major pharmaceutical company and director and patent attorney as well at Merck. She has a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology. Our final witness is David Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell is the founder and president of Patients for Affordable Drugs. He is a patient advocate focused on promoting policies to lower the cost of prescription drugs. He's also a patient who relies on prescription drugs and expects to be in continuous treatment for the rest of his life. He has 40 years of experience working on healthcare and public health policy and has worked to reduce teen smoking, increase use of seatbelts, fight drunk driving, and improve child health and safety. So I want to thank the witnesses for being here today, and I guess we'll swear in the witnesses. Okay. Do you want to stand and Thank you. Do you swear that this testimony you will give before the subcommittee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God? Thank you. You can be seated, and I'll now recognize the witnesses for 5 minutes of testimony each, starting with Mr. Kadis, and we'll go through in that order. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Klobuchar and Ranking Member Lee, for the opportunity to testify about prescription drug markets and competition, a critical issue. It's also an honor to be back with the subcommittee, although it's a little more stressful from this side of the dais. Prescription drugs cost America nearly $370 billion a year, forcing too many to choose between their health and other necessities like rent or food, or to ration among different medicines. So protecting competition in these markets both reduces the financial burden on Americans and improves their health care. Unfortunately, that is not what we are doing. Prescription drug markets are rife with persistent anti-competitive conduct. Current antitrust law, as interpreted and applied, encourages this activity instead of deterring it. Over the past 4 years, the federal courts have shown an almost neurotic fear of over-enforcement and have increased burdens on plaintiffs and narrowed the scope of antitrust law. Courts have raised inappropriate and unnecessary hurdles to antitrust enforcement, which allows anti-competitive activity to escape condemnation. For example, courts are discounting direct evidence of anti-competitive effects, ingenuously accepting business justifications without sufficient evidence, discounting the value of potential competition, and dismissing the likelihood that exclusionary conduct can be successful. Both economic research and empirical results discredit that approach. And as misguided as that approach is, it has opened the door to anti-competitive conduct, particularly in prescription drug markets. By their nature, these markets are susceptible to abusive and anti-competitive conduct. Compared to other industries, harming competition is easy to accomplish and extremely profitable. Preventing or just delaying generic or biosimilar competition increases the dominant firm's revenues and profits substantially. So not surprisingly, within the pharmaceutical industry, some companies have taken advantage of more lenient antitrust rules to adopt increasingly problematic strategies that increase drug costs. It would take more than 5 minutes to catalog every anti-competitive tactic in these markets. I focus on 3 in my testimony. Rebate traps, which are really a penalty provision that allow a dominant firm to punish buyers. Alternative. Product hopping, in which a dominant firm tweaks its product to deaden the impact of generic competition. In one case, this amounted to literally putting a tablet inside a capsule and selling it as a new product. Pay-for-delay patent settlements, in which a branded company pays its generic competitor to stay out of the market. Even in this area, where there has been significant, important enforcement success, that success is both incomplete and tenuous. It would be wrong, however, to think anti-competitive conduct and market power are uniquely a prescription drug market phenomenon. We are seeing this kind of conduct growing across the economy in markets as different as digital, agriculture, and labor. So there are 2 types of broad reforms we can look at. Updating the antitrust laws would go a long way to preventing harmful conduct while promoting aggressive competition in prescription drug markets and across the economy. So the Competition and Antitrust Law Enforcement Reform Act would significantly address most of the problems I discussed in my testimony. Second, certain problems that are unique to pharmaceutical markets may require special legislation. Senator Lee, as you talked about the CREATES Act, which was a bipartisan bill that followed precisely this approach. Without reform, attacking anti-competitive conduct in prescription drug markets and across the economy will be unnecessarily difficult. Consumers, small business, and workers will suffer. I urge Congress to stem the time of anti-competitive conduct by restoring the vitality of the antitrust laws, which will substantially improve competition in prescription drug markets. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Very good. Thank you very much. Mr. Abbott.
Thank you, Chair Klobuchar, Ranking Member Lee, distinguished members of the subcommittee. I'm Alden Abbott, Senior Research Fellow at Mercatus Center at George Mason University. My research focus is primarily on antitrust and competition policy. I will focus on three key points. One, federal antitrust enforcement has been robust and effective in promoting prescription drug market competition. Not perfect, but effective. New enforcement tools are not needed, but additional resources to support FTC and DOJ enforcement are warranted. Two, antitrust enforcement directed at prescription drug markets should remain attentive to potential efficiencies associated with the practices under review. Specialized legislation generally is not appropriate in this area. There are exceptions, as already mentioned. The CREATES Act is one, and which I testified in favor of a few years ago. Three, antitrust enforcement alone will not eliminate all competitive problems in prescription drug markets or in healthcare in general. Indeed, I would argue most of the serious competitive problems will remain because of the nature of a regulatory and legal system in healthcare. So fundamental regulatory reform would be needed. First, antitrust enforcement. The FTC and DOJ have many decades of experience in studying and bringing appropriate antitrust enforcement actions concerning healthcare markets in general and the pharma sector in particular. FTC has also carried out public hearings, undertaken sectoral investigations, and issued numerous reports on competition policy in these areas. An April 2021 Bureau of Competition staff report summarizes the many recent FTC initiatives in pharma. These include actions directed at monopolization and agreements not to compete involving pharma products, mergers involving pharma products, mergers involving distribution, agreements involving monopolization, price and price-related terms, and schemes to obstruct innovative methods of delivering and financing pharma products. In addition, the report describes a variety of FTC friend of the court briefs concerning pharma competition. DOJ's antitrust division has been very busy lately in bringing prosecutions against hardcore cartel conduct by generic drug manufacturers. A March 2021 division update explains 7 firms have been prosecuted, 5 have already agreed to deferred prosecution agreements. Those firms have agreed to pay over $426 million in criminal penalties for collusion that affected over $1 billion of generic drug sales. And that investigation, 2 recent government reports tell a success story. The FTC and DOJ would, however, benefit from additional resources to carry out their enforcement duties given the great economic significance and complexity of pharma market issues. Second, enforcement should continue to focus on efficiencies. Apart from per se illegal cartel conduct, federal antitrust enforcers apply the antitrust rule of reason in assessing potentially anti-competitive pharma market practices. They ask whether particular conduct under scrutiny yields consumer welfare enhancing efficiencies that would offset potential anti-competitive effects. Efficiencies might include, for example, practices that reduce manufacturing or distribution costs to the benefit of consumers. They might also involve enhanced product innovation facilitated by patents and other intellectual property. In the pharma sector, issues of anti-competitive harm and pro-competitive efficiencies often are associated with patents. Harm may arise from the strategic use of patents to delay or deter entry from potential competitors. At the same time, however, patents may facilitate efficient and innovation-enhancing distribution of new technologies. There's a good reason why the U.S. is a leading country in production of new pharmaceuticals, and that has been our robust patent system. Patents can be abused, but they can be very important incentive devices as well. So I would argue Congress should not likely legislate in this area except in cases of clear abuses, as in the CREATES Act. Finally, as I indicated earlier, antitrust is not enough. Broader U.S. healthcare reform itself is important. That's been pointed to by this administration and prior ones in open reports, and I thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abbott. Mr. Levitt.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Chairwoman Klobuchar, Ranking Member Lee, Chairman Durbin, and members of the subcommittee for the invitation to testify. I've worked for innovative pharmaceutical companies for most of my career, and I appreciate the subcommittee's focus on ensuring robust competition. While I am currently with a law firm, I spent many years as in-house counsel in the biopharmaceutical industry, as Chairwoman Klobuchar noted, and I bring that perspective to my testimony today on behalf of the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, or PhRMA. PhRMA represents the nation's leading biopharmaceutical research companies, which are dedicated to developing new treatments and cures to enable patients to live longer, healthier lives. PhRMA's activities on behalf of its members are limited by the antitrust laws and PhRMA's antitrust compliance policy. As I am here on behalf of the Trade Association, I won't be able to comment on individual companies' current or future strategies relating to drug pricing, R&D, marketing, relationships with customers, or how member companies might or might not individually respond in the marketplace to a change in law or regulation. The highly competitive structure of the U.S. biopharmaceutical market has made it possible to bring new medical advances to patients while holding medicine's share of health spending nearly constant. This competition has been facilitated by regulatory frameworks that provide abbreviated approval pathways for generic and biosimilar competition while maintaining incentives for innovative medicines. These frameworks have shifted utilization from brand medicines to generics and biosimilars so successfully that 91% of all prescriptions for drugs in the U.S. are filled with generic medicines, saving the healthcare system hundreds of billions of dollars. And brand medicine prices, after discounts and rebates, have grown in line with or below inflation for the past 5 years. Last year, these net prices actually declined by 2.9%, and this trend is expected to continue. Net prices for brand drugs are projected to remain flat or drop by up to 3% annually through 2025. This is due in large part to robust competition in the drug pricing market. However, on the pharmacy benefit manager, or PBM side, negotiating power has become increasingly concentrated, with just 3 PBMs now controlling more than 3/4 of the market. And we know that the rebates and discounts negotiated between drug manufacturers and PBMs are not consistently shared with patients filling their prescriptions. So, while the overall U.S. biopharma market has seen patient experience is often different, and given that nearly half of spending on brand medicines today goes to entities other than the manufacturers, an initial step in any drug pricing discussion, in our view, should be to ensure that these price concessions are shared with patients. As to innovation, the U.S. is the global leader in this space. Of the nearly 8,000 medicines in development globally, more than half are being developed in the U.S. And this is precisely because we reject government price setting and protect intellectual property. This strong intellectual property framework has enabled biopharmaceutical companies over the past several decades to develop new medicines that have saved lives and alleviated the burden of disease in many areas, from cancer to cardiovascular disease to COVID-19. Undermining IP protections or adopting policies that would chill industry's ability to innovate could seriously threaten these dynamics. This concern applies equally to any measure that would unduly restrict companies' ability to obtain patent protection for improvements to existing products that contribute to disease treatment and patient care. In closing, I want to say that the way biopharmaceutical companies have been frequently mischaracterized by the media and critics bears little resemblance to the industry that I spent decades working in. The reality I experienced was of teams of professionals dedicated to making medicines to cure disease and save lives, with an unwavering focus on ethics and compliance. While we have all observed publicized examples of questionable behavior, we are aware of these examples precisely because we have a system that provides remedies for anti-competitive behavior. Isolated cases that have been the subject of enforcement actions are not evidence of an entire industry run amok, but rather of a healthy, functioning system. The U.S. biopharmaceutical market is the most innovative in the world precisely because it is highly competitive. We urge caution and respect for the strong IP protections and market-based policies that have been the foundation of American innovation. Thank you and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Levitt. Dr. Moody.
Chairwoman Klobuchar, Ranking Member Lee, and Chairman Durbin. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today on this important issue. Fresenius Kabi is a healthcare company that specializes in bringing affordable, off-patent medicines to patients. We employ over 4,000 people in the US and have key domestic manufacturing, research and development, and distribution centers across the country. During the pandemic, our injectable medicines were routinely used to treat patients in the ICUs, and several of our medicines and devices are currently held in the US Strategic National Stockpile. One of our products is also used in the COVID-19 vaccine. A balanced and fair patent and rebate system is essential to be able to continue this life-saving work, as well as providing branded companies with the time that they need to recoup their investments and fund the next generation of innovative drugs before our more affordable products come to market. However, Fresenius Kabi has experienced a system shift whereby branded pharmaceutical companies are now able to hold on to monopolies for old drugs for much more than 20 years, long after they've aged out of being thought of as being considered innovative. This hurts access for patients to affordable medicines and stresses payment systems that need to be kept solvent to pay for true innovation. Prolonged monopolies exacerbate rebate practicing and intensify the already misaligned incentives for health plans and pharmacy benefit managers, the PBMs. By extending the number of years that a rebate and a list price can grow, it exacerbates and grows the patient out-of-pocket costs. And it also puts pressure on the PBMs to prefer the more expensive branded products compared to the more affordable alternatives in order to secure their rebate revenue. And of course, these benefits to the PBMs are not passed on to the patients. So far, the current policy debates around drug prices have failed to address the root cause of the problem, which is an excessive number of patents around drugs, many of which are low quality and do not provide true benefits to patients. Because of the misuse of patent thickets and rebates as marketing tools and product hopping as another tool to thwart competition, the US branded pharmaceutical industry is not a market system with downward pressure at an appropriate time. I'd like to explain how it's possible to grow a patent thicket around a single drug. But to be clear, of course, Fresenius Kabi is in favor of high-quality patents. Our industry cannot exist without it. Patent thickets comprise mostly of secondary patents, which are those patents that are filed after the core patents on the product are filed. Not all secondary patents are bad. However, the key to forming a patent thicket is you take each secondary patent. Let's say, for example, a patent that covers a weekly dosing regimen for a drug, and then you multiply it into child patents, or they're called continuation patents, each having incrementally different words. For example, patent 1, if I'm using the same example, might claim dosing every 5 to 7 days. Patent 2 might claim dosing every 6 to 8 days, and you keep going. This forms a family around a secondary invention. Now, let's say you have a drug that has 10 such families, and each family contains, say, 15 continuation patents. That results in a thicket of 150 patents, all derived from just 10 original patent filings. And most of the patents in that thicket are those incremental continuation patents that don't bring new benefits to patients. So I'm not suggesting that all secondary patents are bad. The problem is the sheer volume of patents strategically thicketed around a drug, which shields most of the patents from scrutiny. Biosimilar companies do not have the funds and resources to litigate scores, and certainly not hundreds of patents. Courts can't even litigate scores of patents effectively in a single lawsuit. So how do we know that many of these patents that are shielded and protected are low quality? Well, the Patent Office offers a procedure called an IPR, an inter-partes review, or a post-grant review, IPR or PGR, to challenge the validity of a patent. And statistics from the USPTO show that in 2020, third parties were successful in having their IPRs instituted against 56% of all the patents that they challenged, which suggests that over half of the patents that were challenged were at least of questionable quality. However, patent thickets can be created at a cost that's easily affordable to branded companies. It costs approximately $25,000 to obtain and maintain just one patent. Conversely, it costs third parties approximately $1 million to file a single IPR against a single patent. And so biosimilar applicants cannot economically use IPRs and PGRs to clear a path through hundreds of patents. This is why building a patent thicket is a numbers game, designed to shield patents, sidestep the scrutiny of IPRs and PGRs, and create an inappropriate monopoly. Among the root causes of patent thickets are the examination procedures and incentives at the US Patent Office, and this patent thicket trend is particular to the United States. It's true that the US is the innovation capital of the world, and so we must have a strong patent system. But the pendulum of encouraging innovation should not swing so far as it goes into an anti-competitive direction. As well as exacerbating rebate pricing, inappropriate monopolies also allow branded drugs the time to develop more and more sophisticated lifecycle management strategies so that by the time biosimilars come to the market, they're irrelevant. Furthermore, patent thickets in the US are now discouraging development and launch of biosimilars. And while biosimilars of these drugs will eventually reach the US, we expect that they will be delayed several years after they come on market in Canada and Europe. So in sum, we urge Congress to address the root cause of the drug pricing problem, look beyond the policies in the jurisdiction of traditional healthcare entities. Instead, we urge Congress to put an end to the inappropriately long patent monopolies and rebate schemes that reward prescribing the higher cost branded drugs when the lower cost drugs are available. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak on behalf of my company and patients who would benefit from availability of affordable and essential medicines.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, Mr. Mitchell. And then I'm going to concede my time of questioning to our chair of our Judiciary Committee, who's in charge of getting us out of all kinds of thickets. So I thought that would be a good segue. Mr. Mitchell.
Chair Klobuchar, Ranking Member Lee, Chairman Durbin, members of the committee. I'm David Mitchell. I'm founder of Patients Today. I have an incurable blood cancer, and prescription drugs are keeping me alive. My doctors have me on a 4-drug combination right now with a list price of more than $900,000 per year. Just one of my oral drugs that comes in this little bottle is called Pomalyst. It's priced at almost $21,000 for 21 capsules that I have to buy every 28 days. Because Medicare beneficiaries like me pay our costs based on list price, I spent more than $18,000 out of pocket last year just for Pomalyst. For people with my cancer, multiple myeloma, drugs account for 60% of the cost of treatment. I'm a very lucky man. These drugs are keeping my cancer at bay right now, but eventually this combination will stop working and I'll need a new treatment. So I care deeply about innovation and new drug development, but drugs don't work if people can't afford them, and that's why today's hearing is so important. Examining anti-competitive industry practices that both inhibit innovation and drive up prices. When a drug company makes a truly inventive discovery, it should be rewarded with a patent and receive a fair return. But the drug industry would have you believe that every patent is deserved and that the volume of patents granted is an indicator of innovative achievements. That could not be further from the truth, as you just heard. Neither new patents nor new drugs necessarily equal real innovation. Worse, in too many cases, manufacturers are abusing America's patent system to prevent competition and block affordable generic and biosimilar drugs from coming to market. There are a variety of strategies. They've been outlined by everybody up here: product hopping, patent thicketing, pay-for-delay deals, abuse of the FDA's citizen petition process. More importantly than the problems is that there are solutions. There are bipartisan bills that address these abuses, including legislation led by members of this committee And Chair Klobuchar went through them. Senator Blumenthal's bill with Senator Cornyn addressing product hopping and patent thickets. Senator Durbin and Cassidy's Remedy Act is another terrific solution for further cracking down on evergreening behaviors. Chairwoman Klobuchar, we hope this year is the year that we see your bills with Senator Grassley that stop pay for delay and citizen petition abuses be acted into law. Of course, Biopharma opposes reforms that would constrain its monopolies or curb its unilateral power to dictate prices. So it threatens me that any reforms will destroy innovation and access to new drugs. But in fact, it's these anti-competitive practices that actually inhibit innovation. Why? Because if drug companies can block competition and raise prices on old drugs to drive profits and trigger executive bonuses, they have far less incentive to take risk and invest in R&D to find the innovative new drugs that could command high prices and extend my life. The headwaters of the drug price problem is high list prices set by manufacturers. But there are other anti-competitive practices downstream in the supply chain that should be addressed this year, including those by pharmacy benefit managers. PBMs are black boxes that cut secret, mutually beneficial rebate deals with manufacturers, and none of it is transparent. Drug companies and PBMs enter into rebate arrangements that are specifically designed to thwart lower-cost competition. Rebate walls, rebate traps, and other exclusionary contracting practices should simply be outlawed. Let's be clear. These deals are not designed to help patients like me by lowering prices or increasing patient choice. No, they are emblematic of our drug pricing system that is built to benefit those who profit from it at the expense of those it is supposed to serve. We're pleased that the FTC recently decided to tackle these issues. We hope Congress will ensure that the FTC's ability to seek damages and monetary penalties in consumer protection and competition cases. Of course, the President's executive order on competition includes many welcome steps to lower drug prices. But when all is said and done, on everything I've just mentioned, we could still wind up paying 4 times what other wealthy nations pay for the exact same brand drugs. That's why we need comprehensive reforms, including Medicare, to negotiate lower prices. Medicare negotiation is supported by 90% of Americans, and it's time to pass it. In the end, all of the work on drug pricing that's being done up here is about restoring balance to ensure we get the innovation we need at prices we can afford. You hold the power to make the changes the American people are demanding. We're going to try and do our part to make sure their voices are heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you, Chairman. And Senator Lee, this is an important hearing. I think the American people, given a choice to topics that we might discuss in Congress, would put this at the top of the list. At least they tell us that when we take polls. It's interesting to me that we live in a country where so many people can spell the word Xarelto. And you just wonder, how in the world did that happen? Could it be that the pharmaceutical industry is spending $6 billion a year? Is it possible advertising? Is it possible that the fact that we see their ads 9 times a day on average is educating the Americans on these drugs? Senator Grassley and I decided to ask the General Accounting Office for some information on this, and they did a study. They found that between 2016 and 2018, advertised drugs on television and other places accounted for 58% of Medicare's budget for medications. Coincidence? These ads ballooned Medicare spending to a tune of $320 billion over 3 years. When I asked Blue Cross Blue Shield in Chicago, why are premiums going up? I said, number one reason, the high cost of prescription drugs. They advertise them on television so consumers will ask for them at the doctor's office. The doctor then has a choice. Explain to them why they may not need it, maybe even lose the patient, or just prescribe it. Most times they just prescribe it. And it ends up being added to the cost of health care in America. And it just keeps going up unless you're lucky enough to live in Canada. Instead, you're going to be stuck with these prices. So, Mr. Mitchell, when it comes to this advertising on television, since the United States and New Zealand are the only 2 countries in the world that allow it, what value is it to the consumer?
I think the more information you give to consumers, the better, to help them understand the choices they are being called upon to make. I'm not sure that including prices in ads will lower prices, but I do believe that it will help consumers understand better what's happening to them. We also support, frankly, eliminating the tax deduction for consumer advertising by drug companies in order to discourage their use, because they really are used only to sell more drugs at higher prices.
Well, I might just say that the fact that a drug as common as Lantus insulin, approved in 2000 with 45 follow-on patents, it helped to block competition for 37 years. During that time, the price of Lantus insulin was hiked 25 times, from $35 to more than $300. And that's not an unusual situation. Unfortunately, it's a common situation. So perhaps if the consumer finally catches on that these drugs are just going wildly high, there might be a second thought about the heavily advertised Humira as to what it might cost on a monthly basis. I'm glad your drugs are saving your life. I'm glad you're here to tell us about it. But there comes a point where you say it's your money or your life when it gets right down to it. So let me ask you this, if I can, Mr. Levitt. In your testimony, you cite the $83 billion investment in research and development by pharma companies in 2019. You state, quote, due to uncertainty around R&D endeavors, investors require higher returns to compensate for higher risk. This pharmaceutical industry responds to every single policy proposal on drug pricing, claiming it will chill innovation, and that a single penny in reduced profits could mean a freeze on life-saving innovation. How do you square the colossal amount spent on spending? How do you square the fact that 14 largest drug makers spent more on stock buybacks than on research and development during the past 5 years?
Thank you, Chairman Durbin. So these are individual, obviously, economic decisions by pharmaceutical companies. And I would say, let me step back and start out by saying, I can assure you that biopharmaceutical companies do not invent life-saving medicines in order to make them inaccessible to patients. There's a balance between innovation and access, and innovation is critical. R&D spend is very high and has increased significantly over the past several years. It's at a peak now, and the U.S. accounts for the vast majority of that spending. Companies also put their money into making patients aware of the benefits and potential uses of their products through direct-to-consumer advertising, which is an important means of conveying information to patients about drugs. As you said, prescribers then have the choice of whether to prescribe the drug.
It doesn't work that way. Unfortunately, it just doesn't work that way. Consumer, remembering the name of the drug and remembering the person who skipped across the field of flowers, that go into their doctors and say, I think I need this. You know that most doctors, instead of getting into a debate, are going to prescribe it. That's why you win on consumer advertising. People are partially educated, and doctors neither have the inclination nor time to debate with those patients.
Mr. Chairman, I would rather not posit that doctors are making irresponsible prescribing decisions because of their patients coming into them, but it may be that we have to agree to disagree on that one.
Well, we do disagree on that one. I do want to tell you there has been a massive investment in innovation in pharmaceuticals. It's been done in Washington with the National Institutes of Health. The numbers are pretty amazing. Funding from the NIH contributed to the published research associated with every single new drug approved by FDA between 2010 and 2019, 356 new medications. We're putting billions each year into the NIH. We want to make sure that consumers can afford the products that these pharmaceutical companies generate from that research. Do you think we're getting that kind of return?
Senator Durbin, I would say that the research ecosystem is a complete whole of which basic research funded by the government, by NIH, is an important part. But NIH does not bring drugs into clinical development and marketing approval. That can only be done by pharmaceutical companies. And I think if we look at the statements of the NIH itself, they will acknowledge that without the efforts of the pharma industry to develop and bring drugs to market, their basic research would not produce patient-accessible innovation.
But if you listen to Dr. Moody, and she's pretty convincing, the thickets that we've created in patent law cannot serve the purpose of research or innovation or the benefits to the consumers. It's all about monopoly control. of some of these drugs so that you can have profits for a longer period of time. Isn't that right?
Mr. Chairman, I guess I would take issue with a couple of comments made by my learned colleague here, Dr. Moody. First of all, it's not that easy to get a patent in the first place. To get a patent, you have to show that the invention is patentable. It has to have novelty, utility, and other features that entitle it to get a patent. And I would also point out that innovation does not stop upon approval of a product. There are many very important innovations in product development post-approval that benefit patients tremendously. Things like even changing the dosage form of a product from an injectable to an oral, even reducing dosage frequency or allowing for a fixed drug combination instead of having the patient take multi-drugs for HIV or other conditions. I could go on. There's many, many, many innovations. Improving stability profile, that's something that's been in the news recently. It's obviously a key.
I'm sorry, I'm out of time. I'm sorry.
You can, I mean, if you want, Senator Durbin,
I just
please,
wanted
if you want
Dr.
to
Moody-
allow him to finish and then Dr. Moody to respond, and then we'll
That's
turn
what
it
I'm
over to
looking
Senator
for.
Lee.
I'd like to ask Dr. Moody to respond to that.
Okay. Dr. Moody.
Sure. So we see the US patent system as being an outlier now compared to other systems around the world. In the US, there are, of course, rules for examining patents that are working well, but it's also easy to circumvent those rules in order to do this numbers gaming, where you can build up incrementally different patents of having claims of incrementally different wording to make an army of continuation patents, all derived from just one original patent filing. This ends up building a patent thicket that's both protracted and multi-layered. So overall, we do believe that the root cause of the problem is the examination procedures and the rules that the USPTO is using, and that by tightening up those rules, it can help provide a more balanced patent system that can provide the benefits to both incentivizing innovation as well as allowing affordable medicines to come onto the market in more appropriate time.
Madam Chairman, if I could just read one sentence into the record, and thank you for your patience.
Of course.
The top 12 best-selling drugs in America each have an average of 71 patents, and 78% of all new patents are for drugs that are already on the market. Thank you.
Excellent. Not excellent fact. Excellent job, Senator Durbin. And next up, Senator Lee.
Thank you, Chair Klobuchar. In the last few hours, as we've been talking about the CREATES Act, we've seen the filing of what may well be the first complaint, U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, asserting claims under the CREATES Act. I've gone through the complaint. It looks like it's well written. Can't speak to the merits of it beyond what I've seen. Other than to point, this was a complaint filed by Teva Pharmaceuticals against Amicus Therapeutics. In reading the complaint, it was confusing, mildly, because of the fact that one of the real parties in interest, the defendant, is named Amicus, and I think that might throw off the court from time to time. Mr. Levitt, let's start with you. In 2019, the Office of Inspector General for the Department of Health and Human Services found that the rebate model used by PBMs was at least a significant contributor to high drug prices. What reforms do you think we ought to consider in order to address this? Now, I ask that keeping in mind that some experts believe that PBMs should be required to have a fiduciary obligation to their beneficiaries. Would this help solve the problem?
Thank you, Senator Lee. We believe that the major need and necessity in this area in terms of reform is greater transparency in pricing and the ability to pass rebates and discounts through to the patients at the point of filling their prescriptions. Because what's going on here is that we have a growing disparity between list prices, which are then subject to rebates and discounts that are negotiated between a manufacturer and a PBM, and those rebates and discounts then do not reliably find their way to the patient. So we strongly believe in greater transparency, and your point about fiduciary duty on the part of PBMs is interesting. I don't think we have a position on that yet, but we certainly will look at that very closely.
Dr. Moody, do you have any opinion on that?
Well, when it comes to rebates and patent monopolies, the problem with these inappropriately extended monopolies is that the rebates can then increase for a longer period of time, and so this grows the patient out-of-pocket costs. But, well, I mean, I'm not the expert here on the mechanics of rebates, so I'm happy to hand over to other witnesses on that.
While we're with you, do you think our patent system encourages or enables some of the anti-competitive conduct by branded pharmaceuticals? And if so, what could we do to change that?
So the way that the patent system's working right now is that it's easy to circumvent certain rules that allow you to repetitively claim a similar invention over and over again. And then this means by building up the numbers of patents by similar applicants, we can't economically clear a path through that many patents. So then you can create an inappropriate monopoly because you're shielding your patents from being scrutinized by the checks and balances that were built into the system. Also, the processes that we use to challenge patents, IPRs and PGRs, have been weakened over the years. And so what would be very beneficial for third parties, such as ourselves, to be able to really scrutinize the patents and put the checks and balances back into the system would be to strengthen the IPR's tools as well.
Yeah, I've believed that for some time. One of the things that I've struggled with there is knowing how we do that and trying to figure out where that problem stems from. Do you think the PTO is sort of rubber stamping weak patent applications? Is that how we're getting there?
So I would say that there are, of course, good secondary patents. And when I pointed to those statistics earlier, evidence shows that over half of the patents that are granted are at least of questionable quality. So yes, that is one side of it. We do need to raise the bar of patentability at the USPTO. We also need to tighten up the rules that make it possible to game the system to create lots of patents. We also need to give third parties better tools to challenge the patents, to put back that checks and balances into the system.
What about within the generic marketplace? I've lost track of the number of drugs that I've followed over the years, where once a drug goes off patent, you'll see some generic competition. You'll see prices go down. And then in many, many instances, you'll see the price for the same molecule that's now off patent skyrocket. Sometimes it levels to levels or even above levels where it was selling while it was still on patent. Do you have any theory as to why that's happening?
It could be that the generics are dropping out of the market for various reasons. They just can't make any profit whatsoever. So issue that goes beyond.
You have
that.
some attrition there if they think they can't make money. And then, okay. Mr. Abbott, we often hear calls for government-mandated price controls, sometimes as a response to the rising cost of prescription drugs. Do you think that approach would work?
I don't think so, Senator. As a general matter, and history shows price controls distort markets. They create shortages, reduce investment, and innovation. The classic example was federal oil and gas price controls in the 1970s. You had less investment in oil and gas, major shortages. In the case of pharma, that would mean fewer drug improvements and new drugs, with many patients being denied opportunities for cures or improvements in the cures in treatment of diseases. Now, the U.S. leads the world in pharma innovation and R&D and would surrender it if it adopted price controls. Canada directly regulates drug prices, which has led to widespread drug shortages, according to a University of British Columbia study, and those shortages are getting worse. Also consider that pharma R&D fell in Canada between 2001 and 2017 significantly, while U.S. pharma R&D more than doubled from $24 billion to $56 billion during that period. So importing drugs from Canada with the aim of reducing prices could also import the problems of reduced availability and investment.
What's cross-subsidization, and what role do you think it might be playing here?
Well, the cross-subsidization problem is you have in many countries these one-buyer national systems where drug companies face a monopsonist, like a monopoly buyer, and they are threatened in some situations with lack of protection for intellectual property or lack of access to markets. So that is one of the reasons why prices are a lot lower. And in fact, you have anti-competitive buyer activity going on. And of course, two wrongs don't make a right. The fact that you have price controls there doesn't mean that, well, you're going to solve a problem in the U.S. if you have price controls. If you then have price controls in the U.S., you're just going to get less investment, and the people who will be harmed are the future patients who would have had cures or better health results, but won't because there's be slower rate of introduction of new and improved drugs.
I see my time's expired. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Lee. Senator Blumenthal's joined us, so I'll have him go ahead. And I've noted, Senator Blumenthal, your work that you and I are doing on rebate traps, as well as work you are doing with Senator Cornyn on product hopping. Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar, and I really appreciate all the great work that you're doing and the work that we're doing together. And thank you to you and the ranking member for having this hearing. I can't think of a hearing that's more important today. I should just note that I'm also a member of the Armed Services Committee, and we were having a joint hearing with the Intelligence Committee on reports of unidentified aerial, whatever you want to call them.
You still joined us?
And
it's impressive.
I feel like I have returned to the real world. And it is a real world that bedevils us every time we go home, literally. I can't think of a better time to have this hearing because we were all back here from visiting our states where we hear, every one of us, doesn't matter whether we're Republican or Democrat, about a woman or a family or a man who is foregoing whatever, clothes, food on the table, or maybe even the medicine itself because of the skyrocketing prices of drugs. They've increased 40% over the last decade, and they're continuing to climb. And I want to come right to the point. At least some of this price increase is due to abuse of our patent system. Now, I say with no great pride that the engineers and designers here are many of my own profession, lawyers, who advise how to game that system. And one of the particularly harmful ways to do it is known as product hopping. All of you know what product hopping is. It's a process by which branded pharmaceutical manufacturers make small changes to drug formulas to extend their patent exclusivity and keep competition out. Let me give you an example, which happens to be very timely as well. Alzheimer's disease is treated by a branded medicine known as Activus. Knowing that the market exclusivity for this drug was running out, Activus sought to replace its twice-daily dosage of Alzheimer's treatment with a new extended release, a once-daily version, without changing the medical benefits, the essential ingredients of the drug. After the FDA approved the new drug, Activus was able strategically to wait for 3 years, 3 whole years, to introduce the new extended release version in order to extend its exclusivity in the U.S. market. Once introduced, Activus used the patent system to hop patients, pushing all of its customers onto the new drug while pulling the old drug from the market. And as a result, it was able to continue charging monopoly prices long after its market exclusivity had run out. This product hopping practice enables drug companies to stop generics, biosimilars, and other essentially innovations at lower prices, which is kind of the definition of abusing market power. So I want to ask Dr. Moody, how are biosimilar alternatives hindered by the practice of product hopping?
So yes, that's very true. Product hopping is a tactic used by branded drug companies to shift market just before biosimilars come to market in order to thwart the competition. And this tactic can also be used to increase the price. We feel like advertisements for the new presentations of these product hops, they often minimize the risks and exaggerate the effectiveness, as well as including unsubstantiated claims of superiority over the biosimilars. Product hops can be addressed by limiting the promotional material, including the direct-to-consumer advertising that would influence patients and providers to switch to the product hop, unless the branded drug company has conducted a clinical trial that proves evidence of clinical superiority. Another mechanism to address product hopping is to strengthen the Department of Justice and/or the Federal Trade Commission's ability to bring cases against branded drug companies who are engaging in product hopping.
Thank you. Well, I can tell you also, Senator Cornyn and I have introduced, actually we've reintroduced the Affordable Prescriptions for Patient Act, which would put an end to this anti-competitive practice. It was approved unanimously in the last session of Congress, unanimously by the Judiciary Committee. It never received a vote on the floor, and I'm hoping that we'll get bipartisan support to do it again. It would also prohibit some other abusive practices like patent thicketing, but product hopping in a way epitomizes the worst of the present system. I recognize the importance of patents in encouraging innovation. We can all talk about it to a fairly well, but when it's abused, it actually impedes innovation and prevents it. Mr. Mitchell, I'm hoping you perhaps can shed light on the human costs of this anti-competitive practice. How are patients affected by product hopping by branded pharmaceutical companies?
When a drug is about to come off patent, as Dr. Mooney just mentioned, and small changes are made that are incremental to try and move people to this new and more expensive drug, usually, they're stuck in many cases. If it's a hard switch, it's a problem. Courts have begun to get that. If it's a soft switch, sometimes they can be misled into thinking that without evidence, this is better, a superior drug. Sometimes the brand drug companies actually disdrug. And so patients are often misled into taking the hopped product, the new product, when the old product would do just fine. Or say they changed the dose from 160 milligrams to 80 milligrams, or 80 milligrams twice a day to 160 milligrams and charge once a day and charge a lot more, when they could go on taking the other drug and it would work just fine. The fact is the product hops reduce choice and kind of push people toward more expensive drugs that they don't necessarily need.
Thank you. My time has expired. This topic is a big and important one, and I thank all of you for helping us shed light on it to the American people, although they already know in their pocketbooks and their hearts and all too often their bodies how devastating it can be. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Blumenthal. And just to show how big and important this is, we've not only had the chair of the Judiciary Committee at much of this hearing, but also the ranking member who's been such a leader on these issues. And so Senator Lee and I welcome Senator Grassley.
I was going to open with some comments about you and I cooperating on a lot of legislation, but
You can go ahead.
I'll just put those two. I'll just put those 2 pages in the record.
Excellent.
So I don't take time for that. I'd like to have the witnesses comment on the issue of pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, and the possible negative effects their actions have on prescription drug prices for consumers. PBMs operate with little to no transparency, making it very difficult, if not impossible, to understand the price of prescription drugs. Instead, we have a complex web of prices, rebates, and formularies that make it near impossible to understand drug prices. This problem is made worse by consolidation and concentration within the PBM marketplace. 3 companies control 75% of the market and are vertically integrated and owned by other players in the healthcare industry. This is a high level of concentration and control over a projected $358 billion spent on the prescription drugs in 2020. So has there been too much concentration leading to very few companies with too much power? Would be one of my questions. And the second one would be, should PBMs be required to provide more transparency on how prescription drugs are priced? Anybody can take a crack at it on either side of the issue.
I'm happy to jump in there, Senator Grassley, if you don't mind.
Please.
We completely agree with you that the current situation with respect to pharmacy benefit managers and the market power and negotiating power that they have needs to be scrutinized very carefully. What is often perceived as an increase in prescription drug costs on the part of patients is actually the result of the failure of these PBMs, who, as you said, control 3/4 of the market for prescription drug benefits, the failure of these PBMs to be transparent or to share or pass through the rebates and discounts that are being negotiated between themselves and manufacturers to the patients at the point of prescription. This is why, although when you look at net prices, that is the price of pharmaceuticals after rebates and discounts, those prices are stable or declining. But patients are perceiving an increase in costs, and that is because the costs are being shifted onto the patients. And we believe that's a problem that really needs to be examined closely.
Anybody to add to it, or anybody want to express an opposite position?
Senator, I don't know that I want to express an opposite position. I think there clearly has been substantial consolidation in the PBM market, and you would expect if that consolidation leads to market power that... Microphone, please. Sorry about that. That consolidation, if it leads to market power, you would see that in the PBMs taking a larger and larger share of the rebates. So I think that's a really important question. And I think this committee and those of you who have asked the agencies to focus on it are quite right. I do want to say that one of the things that can be problematic in this debate is that various actors like to finger point. We should be looking at all actors, but we should also remember that the rebates are a tool used by branded pharmaceutical companies to prevent generic entry or to limit competition, which is something your Finance Committee report made a finding about on insulin. So, well, yes, let's look at PBMs, but let's make sure we look at all actors in this marketplace.
Senator Grassley, if I may,
Yes.
I think it is wrong that a patient like myself cannot know if the preferred drug on a formulary is there because it's the best drug for me, it's the least expensive drug among equally effective options, or if it's just there because the PBM got a big kickback, a legal kickback that we call a rebate. We believe that there must be more transparency in the way the PBMs operate. We need to know how much of the rebate is going to lower my premium, lower my out-of-pocket, is going to the profit of the PBM and or the insurer, and now they're one and the same for the big three. So we believe that transparency is key. The headwaters of the problem of high drug prices is list prices set by drug companies, but these downstream anti-competitive practices by PBMs need to be addressed, and we need to make sure that they're working on behalf of patients. Senator Lee mentioned maybe they should have a fiduciary responsibility to me. That'd be just fine. Thank you.
I want to go on to another issue. I'm concerned about the effect of so-called rebate traps, rebate walls on patients' access to quality, low-cost medicine. These are practices where drug manufacturers bundle together rebates over multiple products so that if a payer decides to purchase or cover a competitor's alternative, cheaper drug, they forfeit the rebates and discount on the entire bundle of a manufacturer's product. For any of you that want to tackle this, do you believe that companies engaged in bundling rebates over multiple products can be harmful to patients' access to quality, lower-cost drugs? And if you believe this kind of action is anti-competitive, what kind of action would you think would help address the issue? And then that'll have to be my last question.
I'll go again, if you don't mind, Senator. I do believe that these things are hurting patients. I think it's very important to recognize, however, that these rebate traps and rebate walls are deals entered into voluntarily to the benefit of both the drug maker and the PBM. But they are not increasing my choice or lowering my price. And that's why we need you to take a closer look and to have the ability, through transparency, to examine how these deals are working and how PBMs are doing their business. But always remembering that there's a mutuality there going on between the drug company and the PBM.
Okay.
If I could, Senator?
Yes.
Sorry. So to answer your question directly, Senator Grassley, if a company uses its market power coercively in such a way as to exert anti-competitive effects and bar competitors from a market, then that is anti-competitive behavior and it should be scrutinized. We'll, however, have to realize at the same time that not all exclusive contracts are necessarily anti-competitive. It really does depend on the terms and conditions, the duration, the market power of the parties. They can be used in such a way as to reduce prices in principle. But again, when they are used in a coercive and anti-competitive way, they're definitely wrong.
I think one other person wanted to comment, and then I'll be done. Go ahead.
Yes. Senator, that's a great question. And it's absolutely true that dominant companies in this marketplace use rebate traps to forestall entry. And that inures mostly, if not entirely, to the benefit of the dominant company. And while in theory, that action should be anti-competitive, should be illegal under the antitrust laws, we know it's pervasive. It's part of the reason why costs are high in insulin markets. It's why costs are high in the EpiPen market. It's why the drug Remicade, biosimilar competition, has not developed. And part of that reason is because when courts look at this, they're getting it wrong. They're defining markets too broadly. Or, as just recently happened, court looks at a case at summary judgment before you go to trial and says, yes, the plaintiff can prove monopolist. They can prove both parties expected generic entry to take 30% of the market. The brand didn't lower price. The brand didn't improve its product. And yet the entry was an absolute failure. And the court says, oh, but the rebate increased, so there can't be an antitrust problem. That's why when you have laws that are so deferential to dominant firm conduct, then you get this kind of activity that we are all paying for.
Very good. Well, thank you. I just thought I would ask each of you the same question, if you could just keep it to 30 seconds. And it pertains to the fact that U.S. prescription drug prices are the highest in the world. It's been estimated that our drugs here cost between 4 and 2.5 times more in the United States than they do in other developed countries. We can argue about what the right number is, but it is clear we are paying far too much, and it's not getting better. According to one study, prescription drug costs in the U.S. rose 76% between 2000 and 2017. We are the largest drug market with so many of the companies located here. And we are grateful for the work that was done to develop the vaccine. But yet, we continue to pay these high prices. So I just want this 30-second answer. Why are U.S. drug costs so much higher than they are anywhere else in the world, when it's so much of our research money that went into this? And does a lack of competition play a role? Mr. Kaitis.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, competition, the lack of competition plays a significant role, but there are other causes, and which might be addressed by your bill to negotiations, allowing Medicare to negotiate under Part T, or other payment processes that could help control drug prices. And the patent system reform would also help. Sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Abbott.
Yes, Senator, prices are high, but there are also institutional factors. For example, a 2018 HHS report indicated that the expansion of rebates that was actually facilitated, supported by the ACA in some areas, may have actually contributed to the raising of list prices. But also recall pharmaceutical companies have to cover the 90% plus of efforts that fail to bring forth a new drug. The heart of those efforts are in the United States. We, in effect, are cross-subsidizing other parts of the world, as mentioned to Senator Lee.
Mr. Levitt.
So, Senator Klobuchar, other developed countries tend to have very different healthcare systems with a much greater degree of government involvement and price control than I think Americans would be willing to tolerate, and they pay for that degree of government control with less access, less innovation for patients. Yes, we do spend somewhat more on prescription drugs in this country. We can debate the exact number. Our figures would be lower than yours, but yes. But we also spend more on all aspects of healthcare in this country. I saw a study recently, administrative costs in our healthcare system are 4 times what they are in Canada. So we have to put this in context. Prescription drug costs have remained flat at around 15% of the overall healthcare expenditure in this country for the past several years.
All right, I have some responses, but I'm going to keep going down the line. Next, Dr. Moody.
So we're seeing biosimilars hit foreign markets years before they hit the US. That trend is going to continue and get worse because the patent thickets that we're seeing growing up around the newer biological drugs are growing so much faster and bigger than the famous thickets that people are talking about today. The branded drug companies are getting better at this gaming of the numbers game of patent thickets. So just getting biosimilars to the market at a more appropriate time is the best way to bring down those prices, and then you don't need reference pricing either.
Okay, Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Senator. We're paying almost 4 times what other wealthy nations pay for the exact same brand drugs. No other country allows brand drug makers to dictate the prices of drugs as we do in this country, and that's why our prices are so high. They negotiate. We don't, and the outcome is prices that range as high as everyone here knows.
Okay, thank you. We turn to solutions here. Mr. Kaitis, in your written testimony, you compared the competition problems in prescription drug markets to the canary in the coal mine for the failure of U.S. competition law. Are you saying the early warning sign, and then I think most importantly, you think broad-based reforms, as we look at these markets that we've looked at in this committee, yes, tech, and there can be some specific tech laws, what we're going to be doing next month on the agriculture markets, and something Senator Grassley is very interested in, as well as what we've seen from online travel on. Do you think a broad-based support, this is called a softball leading question, would be most helpful?
Absolutely, I do, Senator. And you talked about the Ovation case, right? And it's a perfect example of where antitrust has gone off the rails. It should be very easy to figure out if there are only 2 products that can treat a disease, that they're in the same market. They have to be. And getting rid of that competition has to be bad. Somehow the court got that wrong. Time and again, the government is spending massive resources proving essentially what is obvious and proving, essentially having to prove water makes things wet. And so when we look at the antitrust enforcement in pharmaceutical industries, my good friend Mr. Abbott says it's a sign that things are working. But what we need to look at, what is the conduct that is occurring? And this conduct is so egregious. Like, as we've heard about it today, but literally companies bringing products to market where they put a tablet inside a capsule just to prevent generic competition. It's not innovation. The fact that the system allows that tells us the antitrust laws are too weak.
So you would suggest broad-based support as well as doing some of these specific things like pay for delay and some of the other things we've been talking about with rebates, patent thickets, the best line of this, the best words that we will all take away from this hearing. Dr. Moody, thank you. So,
Yes, I think it is a combined approach.
and I think you also are concerned about the loss of disgorgement and restitution authority at the FTC. Is that right?
Yes.
And you think that needs to be fixed?
Absolutely. And so just a very quick example, back when I was a young attorney and had more hair, the FTC brought a case against a generic company for cornering the market and obtained $100 million in disgorgement. That was roughly 80% of what the company made by violating the law. As a result of that decision, a strong signal and strong deterrence, that type of conduct disappeared from the marketplace for the next 40 years. So taking away that the commission's ability to deprive people of the illegal profits just says, go ahead and violate the antitrust laws, because the federal enforcers, the most they can do is tell you to go forth and sin no more.
Mr. Levitt, in your testimony, you wrote that for both generics and biosimilars, our laws are intended to, quote, strike a balance between providing access to medicines and preserving incentives for innovations. But we are not seeing that balance when it comes, as Dr. Moody has pointed out. What we are seeing is these deep patent thickets with sometimes more than 100 patents, as she pointed out, filed for a single drug, many of which are filed after the drugs are approved. Aren't these practices throwing off what you call the delicate balance between patient access and development incentives? I know there've been a lot of questions about the thickets, but I'm getting to that.
Right.
And that'll be my last one. I'll ask you, Dr. Moody, for a quick response.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. So to begin with, again, as I said earlier, product innovation does not stop upon approval of a product. And particularly with complex products like biologics, there can be many different kinds of inventions that can take place after approval that can improve the profile of the product in ways that matter to patients, to make it easier to administer, to extend the shelf life or improve the stability, and many, many other characteristics. Each of these potentially qualifies for a patent, and patents, contrary to what some have said, are not so easy to get. You have to, as I said earlier, show the requisite requirements to get a patent in the first place. Once you get the patent, it is absolutely subject to challenge through either the inter partes review process or in court or the PGR process. And in a way, one could take the figure cited by Dr. Moody that 56% of the IPRs succeed as evidence that that process works, that if a patent is weak and it's subject to challenge, then it's going to go down. And I can assure you that innovator companies are not in the business of getting weak patents so that they can be struck down. They're getting patents for innovations that improve the product. I just wanted to say, we don't oppose properly targeted legislation on product topping, and I'm happy to discuss, the specifics of that with the committee.
Okay, Dr. Moody, quickly, we have two senators here that have been waiting for a while, so.
Sure. Due to the numbers gaming of the patent system, we can't economically use IPRs and PGRs to clear a path through hundreds of patents. The system would work better if you would get one patent per secondary or follow-on invention, but now they're creating these families of patents around each invention to circumvent and shield the patents just through economic means.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I don't know who's next, Senator Hawley or Cotton. I'm not going to decide between them. Senator Lee, no, you decided to. It's with Senator Hawley here. What are your rules here? Okay.
Josh was here first, but then he left and Tom came. So
Okay, you go for it. Okay, Senator Cotton.
Thank you. Thank you all for appearing today. We've heard a lot about patent rights and anti-competitive drug company actions that harm consumers. I share my concerns on that front, but also I want to discuss concern I have about a Biden administration decision that will also jeopardize our ability to deal with any pandemics in the future. In May, the Biden administration announced its support for a waiver of intellectual property rights at the World Trade Organization. This waiver would mean that American companies that develop life-saving vaccines and treatments to address the pandemic will lose that intellectual property, and the property will be turned over to the rest of the world, including adversaries like China. Now, waiver may be the technical term for what the Biden administration has decided, but a more accurate description would be confiscation. The American companies that spent billions of dollars developing this technology don't exactly have a choice to participate in a waiver of their property rights, of course. We are used to countries like Russia and China and Cuba expropriating the property of not only their own citizens, but Americans as well. But it is unprecedented for an American administration to help our adversaries steal such intellectual property. I won't put aside the question of whether this is morally right or wrong, because it is clearly wrong to steal the property of an American company and its American shareholders. It is also an incredibly dangerous precedent to set. However, I want to focus more directly on the practical implications of the Biden administration's decision to steal the property of American companies. Mr. Levitt, if the Biden administration succeeds in pushing through this expropriation of American companies' property, will this increase the production of vaccines worldwide?
Thank you, Senator Cotton. The short answer is no. Biopharmaceutical companies share the goal of vaccinating as many people as possible, as quickly as possible around the world. But punitive transfers of patents will not help increase production capacity, nor will they accelerate access to COVID-19 vaccines. And in fact, they also risk putting production in the hands of parties who lack the technical and quality know-how to accomplish this. So the concern that apparently lies behind this move, this unfortunate move of transferring patent rights and seizing patent rights, is misdirected. If there are any issues about getting product and vaccine out, it's in the supply chain, not in the IP rights that, as you said, have enabled companies to develop these vaccines in an incredibly short amount of time.
And this supply chain and manufacturing process for the coronavirus vaccines is incredibly complicated. Is that correct?
It absolutely is, Senator.
And it depends on very customized equipment as well as highly specialized knowledge. Is that correct?
Vaccine production is among the most complicated manufacturing processes in the world. There are many, many dozens of separate steps, each of which has to be very carefully controlled and under stringent quality requirements. It's absolutely correct.
So it is not, in fact, the patent rights that these companies have that is the bottleneck for vaccine production around the world, but rather the supply chain and the manufacturing process itself.
Absolutely correct in our view. Yes.
Well, if that is the case, who will benefit from this so-called waiver, or what you might better call an expropriation of American companies' property?
Well, in our view, it certainly won't be patients. In fact, if anyone, as you said, it's going to be the foreign economic competitors who really don't play by the rules in the first place, and that's very unfortunate.
Those competitors, would most of them, or at least many of them, be located in China?
It has been said that that is one of the countries that is in that category. Yes, Senator.
So, Mr. Levitt, these technical terms, like a TRIPS waiver or WTO protections, are not exactly things that roll off the tongues of most Arkansans when I visit with them. But can you explain why it matters to them, why it matters to all Americans that we protect the intellectual property rights of companies, to include the patent rights of these vaccine manufacturers?
Senator, it matters because taking this kind of drastic action to seize intellectual property and violate intellectual property rights is going to endanger future production and innovation by creating confusion and uncertainty among vaccine manufacturers at a time when they are working around the clock to bring needed vaccines to patients. So in short, the damage will be less access to needed medicines and economic harm as well to a vibrant industry that provides high-quality jobs for hundreds of thousands of Americans.
All in return for which we don't get any acceleration in the effective production of coronavirus vaccines. Is that correct?
Precisely.
Thank you.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for being here. I want to come back, if I could, to the question of these pharmacy benefit managers and some of the techniques, mechanisms that they use that are causing so much pain to independent pharmacists in particular. Mr. Case, if I could just come to you. I know this has been a subject of much discussion throughout today's hearing, but I want to ask you about something I don't think has come up, and that is DIR fees. Could I ask you about the DIR fees that PBMs apply, often retroactively, and ask you to comment on why we wouldn't want to limit the ability of PBMs to apply these fees retroactively? In other words, let me state that in the affirmative rather than sort of double negative there. Shouldn't we limit the ability of PBMs to apply these fees retroactively?
So in a moment of being humble, I'm going to say that's actually not an issue I'm aware of, and so I don't think I could provide you an answer that would be useful.
Does anybody else have a view on this down the panel?
Senator, my apologies, but if you could define the DIR, please. I'm so sorry, don't recognize that.
Well, a DIR it's a direct or indirect remuneration fee that is charged, often levied.
Be sure they know I'm on virtually. Okay, let me turn this back up.
Aggregate global estimate that factors in all of the different inputs into the exclusivity life of a product on the market.
That's helpful. Here's where I'm going with this. If we can agree that the life of a patent should be limited, and you've 12 to 13 years you've pointed out, but if in principle, as a matter of policy, we can agree on that, I'm trying to figure out why it is that some of the member companies in the organization you represent have gone to such great lengths to stretch things out in a way that seems almost indefinite. Can you help me with that?
Senator, I guess I would respectfully take issue with the characterization of stretching out. As I've said before, innovations continue after the approval of a product, and those innovations can come in many, many different areas. I won't take up more of the committee's time. I've already listed a number of examples, which can be then subject to patenting. And if those innovations are truly beneficial to patients, they will get out onto the market and they will have uptake in the market. If they're not, then they won't.
Let me ask you something about, or ask you to comment on something that former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb said a few years ago, that patent thickets are purely designed to deter the entry of approved biosimilars. His view is that there's no real business need here. It's about profits. My question would be, if your clients aren't trying to behave in an anti-competitive way, then why aren't all the relevant patent applications for a particular drug filed at once, up front, so to speak, when the product first comes to market, as opposed to staggered over time in a way, again, that tends to lengthen and lengthen and lengthen the protections?
Senator, that is because as the manufacturer gains further experience with the product and continues to examine the product for ways that it can be improved upon, that's a process that naturally takes place over time. When you get the initial approval of a product is when it is ready for approval on the basis of safety and efficacy. That doesn't mean the product is perfected at that time or that it cannot be improved upon in a whole variety of ways that can be beneficial to patient care, to the quality of the product, and to other important attributes. So it's naturally a process that takes place over time as providers and manufacturers gain more experience with the product and continue to perform scientific research on the characteristics of the product. It just doesn't happen all at once. It's not the way science works.
I'll leave it at that. My time has nearly expired. I just want to point out that I think that I think there's agreement that I'm sensing here, at least on this side of the dais, that we've got to do something about the ability of the manipulation of the patent system in order to prevent biosimilars from coming to market in a way that's really harmful to consumers. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And I think you'll see, Senator Hawley, there was a lot of discussion on this side of the aisle as well about the patent thicket issue and the concern that which was one of the reasons we agreed to have Dr. Moody here as a witness. We thought it was important to hear that perspective. Senator Blackburn, you're next. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I really appreciate the hearing on this, and I thank all of you for being here today. And I think that it is going to be important that we look at the entire prescription drug chain when we're talking about possible anti-competitive behavior. The middlemen, the pharmacy benefit managers, as we have talked about more than once today, control nearly 4 out of 5 prescriptions written in the U.S. That is astounding. This is a vast arena of influence that they have over issues that end up being life and death issues, especially concerning to me is the fact that they are controlling the access to so many of these pharmaceuticals. And Mr. Mitchell, as you mentioned in your comments, this is something that is really opaque. There is a need. In addition to this, these healthcare middlemen have undergone vertical transformation that combine the PBM with insurers, specialty pharmacies, and healthcare providers. Vertical integration can result in increased inefficiencies and consumer benefits. However, such integration can also lead to higher barriers for competition in each individual market. Onerous audits, clawback provisions, and patient steering are anti-competitive behaviors by the PBMs, and as some of you have referenced today, you know that that is taking place. And they have caused small pharmacy business owners to struggle to survive. Now, in recent years, 40 states, including my home state of Tennessee, have enacted legislation to actually curb some of these PBM practices. States have also taken action against the spread pricing activities of PBMs, which have cost taxpayers hundreds of millions in the Medicaid program. So I do believe it's time for Congress to understand the impact of potentially anti-competitive PBM practices on patients, small pharmacy businesses, and taxpayers. And Senator Braun and I have introduced S-298, the Pharmacy Benefit Manager Accountability Act. And I do encourage all of my colleagues on supporting this legislation. And Madam Chair, I have a letter for the record, which is a statement from the National Community Pharmacist Association that I'd like to submit.
Be entered in.
Thank you. Mr. Levitt, if I could come to you, please. I know that Senator Grassley talked a little bit about the Senate Finance Report on insulin, and you all had an exchange on that. Let's look at the incentives in the pharmaceutical supply chain, and let me ask you how you think these incentives are aligned, if they are there to drive cost lower and out-of-pocket costs lower, that is one of the things that I hear from so many individuals. They never see the discount that is there. And there is a lack of appropriate alignment in actually lowering the cost of out-of-pocket expenses. And I know Mr. Mitchell had referenced this earlier also. So if you would, for the record, talk a little bit about that alignment.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, in our view, that is one of the fundamental problems in the entire drug pricing system today, is that the incentives are misaligned, and that savings that may exist up front in the system between the manufacturers and the pharmacy benefit managers in the form of rebates or discounts, there's no incentive to pass those on to consumers. And what we've seen is a growing trend for other entities in the healthcare system, other than manufacturers and consumers, to basically realize those savings for themselves. So that today manufacturers, for example, only get a little bit over half of the actual cost of the drugs that they're providing. The rest is going to a variety of stakeholders, including PBMs, government entities, payers, and others. But the patients, the problem is, as you pointed out, is that the patients are not seeing those savings at the pharmacy counter. And we really believe that that is an issue that needs urgent attention.
When we're talking to Tennesseans, that is one of the things that comes up most often. If it is a cardiovascular disease and they have a certain pharmaceutical or certain cancers, what they have to actually stay alive, what they need every month, and the cost for that, and that discount not going to the customer. So I appreciate that. Mr. Cades, I want to come to you, if I may. Commissioner Chopra from the FTC recently made a statement that I thought was significant. The FTC largely stood by as the PBM industry consolidated to 3 main giants and even took steps to undermine state legislation. So this would indicate that there is an intentionality to what the PBMs have done. As you now have the 3 main ones, as I said earlier, they are there, if you will, for 4 out of every 5 prescriptions that are being made in this country. So can the FTC, or should the FTC do more to evaluate the anti-competitive behavior of the PBMs, or should this be given to someone else?
Thank you, Senator. The FTC absolutely should be looking at PBMs and considering whether there's anti-competitive conduct and bringing cases where they can. I do think it's important to remember that at the time that consolidation occurred, when we look at where merger law is, where the case that the Senator Klobuchar talked about, which was a merger monopoly, and the court said, not a problem. If we look at other mergers that the government is losing, it's not at all clear that that FTC trying to stop those consolidation based on what was before them would have been successful given how lenient the merger laws have become. So that's not an excuse for them not to try or to look at it now, but I think it's important to understand that part of the problems we're seeing, whether it be PBMs or with branded companies gaming the system, is directly related to how we have abandoned antitrust law as a true regulator and promoter of competition.
And hindsight is always 20/20, correct? Let me ask each of you this, and I'll ask just for a show of hands. How many of you think that PBMs should be eliminated from the marketplace? There's no one who would eliminate them. How many of you think that PBMs should be reformed and that their power should be diminished? Okay, we've got one hand that is there. All right, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Okay, very good, thank you. Few things. I misunderstood Senator Hawley when he said, on this side of the dais, we have support for doing something about patent thickets. He meant on this side, like all of us together, as opposed to on the party side. So I really appreciate that bipartisan moment. So that's good. And then I thought I'd start out just with something clarifying, something that Senator Cotton was asking about, just a little bit of a different perspective. Mr. Mitchell, there is a different look at why President Biden was interested in sharing vaccines with other countries in this pandemic like we have never seen, with very difficult vaccines to develop. And could you talk about how, from a public health perspective, not to mention a humanitarian perspective, it's beneficial to America to get other people vaccinated in other countries as soon as possible?
So I will say for Patients for Affordable Drugs, we don't have a position on international issues like the TRIPS waiver, but I can speak for myself. A pandemic, by definition, is global, and until we defeat the pandemic globally, we are all going to continue to be at risk from emerging variants like the Delta variant that has popped up and is now killing people disproportionately in this country who haven't been vaccinated, for example. That didn't come from here, it came from elsewhere. So from a public health perspective and trying to look after ourselves in America, but also to be good citizens of the world, making sure people can get vaccines all over the globe is in our best interest, both as people who want to have good health, but also be good citizens.
Okay. Mr. Kades, are you aware what happened? I don't know what happened when President Biden made this announcement to the stock ratings of the pharmaceutical companies. Did they plummet when this went out there?
My understanding, although not an expert in the stock market, that they did not take a substantial hit.
Okay. All right. Sham FDA petitions. That was a moment of asking questions you didn't know the answer to, but I figured you would have some impression of it. Mr. Kades, the practice of filing sham petitions risks delaying the approval of generic drugs and biosimilars and imposes unnecessary burdens on limited FDA resources. Senator Grassley and I introduced a bill, the Stop Stalling Act, to give the FTC enhanced authority to crack down on abuses of this process while allowing petitions submitted in good faith to raise. Can you elaborate on the harms to patients and competition caused by the filing of sham FDA petitions?
Yes, and it's a tragic story, right? The government comes up with this idea that when the FDA makes decisions, average citizens and people involved should be able to petition the the FDA, and so this improves participation. Nobody in their wildest dreams thought that virtually all the citizens' petitions dealing with generic approvals would be filed by their competitors in the branded companies saying, oh no, this generic product, either you have to put special restrictions on it or don't approve it or require more testing. And even if the petition isn't successful, it can take the time, the FDA has to look at it, has to review it, and even though they're supposed to decide within 180 days, they have a million things to do. But so simply by using, in ways similar to the CREATES Act, the problem the CREATES Act address, using the process of the FDA, a process that was supposed to improve participation, branded companies can delay competition and force all of us to pay more for drug costs without any innovation, without any additional advantage. So I think legislation here to correct that problem would be excellent. And I would note that Congress has already tried to fix it once. The branded industry found ways to nullify that, and so I think Congress should take another crack at it.
Okay. Mr. Abbott, you talked about in your written testimony is that the need for greater resources for enforcers these are your words, is particularly acute with regard to pharmaceutical enforcement given the great economic significance and complexity of pharmaceutical market issues. We don't agree on everything in this hearing, but given that you see this acute need, would you recommend that we get some additional resources for enforcement of the laws to the agencies?
Thank you for that question, Senator. Yes.
Very good. Thank you. And, you know, we have this bill that Senator Grassley and I did that actually has passed the Senate now to change the merger fee statute that would add over $100 million to the two agencies. And we haven't gotten, you know, a lot of objections to it because including the Trump administration did support this when we tried to get it done at the end of the year. So, all right. Thank you. Mr. Mitchell, our Medicare program is limited by law in its ability to negotiate drug prices. Removing the non-interference clause, you, I think, mentioned this, so we can allow 43 million patients on Medicare Part D to lower the cost of their medication would be a critical way. I think it would help everyone, not just the seniors who benefit from this. Do you think that removing the non-interference clause is a good idea? And what additional reforms do you think would be required for Medicare to get better price terms for the enormous quantity of drugs that it purchases?
Yes, we believe the non-interference clause should never have been inserted in 2003 and that it needs to be removed. It needs to be removed not only for Part D drugs, but for Part B drugs as well. You know, the specialty drugs, many of which are Part B drugs, account for 0.4% of all prescriptions, but 46% of all spending on drugs in this country. So we would love to see the non-interference clause eliminated, negotiations extended to D and B, and the prices negotiated by Medicare extended to the private sector to help employers who provide health care for 156 million Americans.
Very good. Thank you. Just a few last questions here. Been a long hearing. Mr. Kaitis, as we look to merger, I mean, there's a lot of predictions, and we're seeing them now. We're seeing this merger bonanza, not just in pharma, across the way. What can the FTC do to better police pharmaceutical mergers under current law? Another softball, would reforming the laws, as suggested in my bill, would that enable the agencies to do more to police anti-competitive mergers, changing the burden for big mergers, other ideas that we have out there?
Yes. So merger enforcement is going to be critical for the agencies. I think it's fair to say that they need to be more risk-seeking, but under the current standards, the law is too lenient. So I absolutely agree that it's time, because what we see now is that the average litigated merger case, it's not a complicated case, but it still goes to trial. The government has to go, even when it wins, has to prove that a merger monopoly is problematic. So I think ideas of adopting new presumptions makes sense, and we have 20 years of economic research that actually identifies better situations where mergers are likely to be harmful. That should be incorporated into the law. I think changing the standard to make it clear that potential competition matters and rejiggering the balance between competition and consolidation. And finally, obviously, just giving the agencies more resources.
Okay, last thing, because it's good to end with something Senator Lee and I have been working on together. Way back, Senator Collins and I worked on when there were drug shortages, and there still are, obviously, from time to time, using that as a reason to bring in drugs from other countries when they didn't have kids' cancer drugs and things like that, which was actually happening. And so this is looking at it a different way of allowing the Secretary of Health and Human Services to respond when sellers of older off-patent drugs are in a position to drastically raise prices due to a lack of competition. So that's why we put together the Short on Competition Act along with Senator Durbin and Grassley to address the problem by allowing temporary importation of the same product from other countries that have strong drug safety standards. And then, of course, Senator Grassley and I have a more permanent bill. but would allowing the safe importation of drugs inject some competition into our system? Because maybe, I think our argument here is if you do have the competition or you have the lower prices, then you wouldn't have to go to this. But if you don't, why not allow some competition from safe countries?
No, particularly from safe countries, I think that's an excellent idea and would improve competition. Right, what we find particularly in older...
Maybe even if it was just out there as a threat, that might keep some prices down sometimes, the Ovation case, other things?
It very well could. But one of the problems on older drugs is to get approval, they tend to be smaller markets, and a company has to go through 18 months, spend money for that. And so when the price went sky high with Daraprim, there were all sorts of products on the market in Europe that had been on the market for 20 years. Let's find a way to inject that competition back into the United States, and maybe you're right, the price increase wouldn't have happened or it wouldn't have lasted as long.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Senator Lee?
Mr. Kadis, there's a bill called the TEAM Act that I introduced along with Senator Grassley. And one of its provisions would require courts to find that conduct is anti-competitive where there is direct evidence of clear intent to harm competition. In your view, would this make it easier for antitrust enforcers to stop anti-competitive conduct in the pharmaceutical industry?
Yes, I think it would help improve antitrust enforcement. The number of times when I was litigating where I felt like it was a triangle litigation, it was the FTC versus what the company said in its documents versus what they were saying on the stand. And you would think fact finders would say the stuff you put in your documents that said we were doing this to harm competition matters. But they see the person on the stand and they're like, okay, well, I guess I don't believe that. So I do think it would help. I would say that one thing to think about is once you make that law, companies will be more careful about what they put in their documents. Right. But that's just a minor comment.
Right. Yeah, and that's our hope and our intent, and certainly our expectation is that would help, as would the fact that it roughly doubles the total amount that we would spend on the enforcement of our antitrust laws. Now, in your written testimony, you allude to the way that courts have come to treat economic evidence in antitrust cases. One of the provisions of the TEAM Act would limit the ability of courts to give credit to defendants for justifications that are speculative, out of market, or that don't benefit consumers. Would this help some of the same problems faced in protecting competition in healthcare markets?
Absolutely. And it's sort of the same dynamic as your last question, that once you get to litigation, magically companies have all sorts of justifications that aren't, and so tightening up those requirements would be very helpful.
Thank you. Mr. Abbott, as I alluded in my opening remarks, I have reason to be concerned about the cost and availability of insulin. I was excited to see recently that Walmart has broken into the insulin market and has launched 2 new low-cost products. What can you tell me about why it's taken so long for this kind of disruption to occur, and why haven't we seen this kind of innovation from a traditional pharmaceutical company?
Well, I'm not an expert, Senator, on the traditional pharmaceutical companies, but I will notice that it's interesting that discount retailers, and Walmart obviously is a prime example, have been very important figures in healthcare. In fact, there was some recent study that Medicare Part D, that some costs for generics and Medicare Part D bargaining was actually higher than the prices negotiated by Walmart. So this suggests again that perhaps there should have been more companies doing this, but that the private sector is very good at bargaining. And if you lift regulatory barriers to the ability of companies to enter into these markets, that's all to the good. I think one of the big problems here is all the discussion was of PBMs and of other big actors, as you have so many large entrenched actors. And regulatory structure, and I don't have an exact answer here, but maybe that regulatory structure made a lot of large companies reluctant to enter. But that's my thought.
Dr. Moody, what I was talking to Mr. Abbott about relates in many ways to restrictions on entry. Anytime you have a viable market, in order to have actual competition, you sort of need to have the ability of new entrants to enter a marketplace. So I'm always worried about restrictions on entry that make it more difficult for people to enter into a marketplace. Many times we see drug manufacturers imposing really high prices just, well, because they can. I mean, that is sometimes what will happen if someone has the ability to do that without facing competition. In a normal market, this would prompt entry into the marketplace by a would-be competitor and thus spawn competition. Competition would in turn bring about corrections in price, and it certainly wouldn't reward someone for continuing to escalate the price of their own product. It would end up punishing them. But in the drug space, entry can take many years and can cost millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions or billions of dollars of investment to break into it. What do you think we could do to make it easier so that patients benefit from competitive markets? Or is there anything we can do to limit the effect on restrictions on entry?
Sure. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about price controls. We don't think that's the solution. The solution is more competition. Of course, it does take, up to 10 years to develop a biosimilar. It takes a long time. By the time those biosimilars are ready to launch, we're then seeing the thickets that I described earlier, which contain large families of patents around the same inventions. What we should also do is preserve pro-competitive settlements. It's important that we don't assume that all patent settlements are anti-competitive, because pro-competitive settlements, which are those settlements that do not include pay for delay, those settlements are one of the few tools that we have to address a patent thicket as a whole, because, as I mentioned before, it's not economically possible to litigate scores and hundreds of patents. Those pro-competitive settlements act as a compromise that strike a right balance. Because we can't litigate so many patents, if we were to not have any settlements, you would often see the biosimilars coming to market much later at the end of the expiry of the last patents in the thicket, including the lower quality ones, which are shielded from scrutiny. And so a pro-competitive settlement brings the launch date earlier as a kind of a compromise within the overall settlement. It strikes that right balance of bringing the products to market early. Legislative proposals, of course, have to target those anti-competitive settlements, but carve out the pro-competitive settlements as well.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, if we were to discourage or even prohibit settlements generally in this area, one can imagine ways in which that could harm consumers. It would harm basically everyone except perhaps lawyers. Who could benefit from the ability to generate revenues to fund indefinite generations of their posterity in their private college tuition expenses. But other than lawyers, it probably would benefit no one and hurt everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Lee. Thank you to our witnesses. It's been a long hearing and I think a good one. I was talking to some reporters yesterday about this, and I think that they said, but we've heard these hearings before, and is anything actually going to happen? And I came out of this more hopeful than I was before. I think you have a number of senators very interested in your patent thicket issue, Dr. Moody. I think that there has been long-term interest in funding the agencies, even from our conservative witness here, and making sure that we have ample enforcement authority, and we have ample authority, ample resources to do the work. And I think there also are some things that we can do specific to the pharmaceutical issues, as we talked about product hopping and the pay for delay and the sham petitions, all of which are of bipartisan interest. But then I also think that there are some bigger things that we need to do if we really want to get this done. Some in the pharma area with negotiation of prices, Mr. Mitchell, but then also, as Mr. Kadis has so well pointed out, beyond pharma, to look at our antitrust bills as laws, as we have done so often in this country's history, where we see a problem and we adjust and we make some changes to them so that they can be actually used in an effective way. And I think we know that somehow the pendulum has swung too far one way, and that's part of why we've been having these tech issues and other things, because we just don't have the tools to match the sophistication of our economy. And when that's happened in the past, actually, people who sat in these chairs, well, maybe not right in this room, it probably didn't exist 100 years ago, or I know it didn't, but they adjusted. They made changes to the laws, and I truly believe that's what we need to do again. So I want to thank the witnesses, and we're going to leave the record open for a week. And you want to add anything, Senator Lee? You're in your own thicket over there. You're all good?
Thank you.
Okay. All right. The hearing is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.